Welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about matter and change as part of chapter 2. We're going to focus today on properties and changes of matter. So chapter 2 section 1 focuses on properties of matter, and then chapter 2 section 4 focuses on the changes of matter. So we're going to look at both of those today through this video. Your targets for this video, the ones we are going to cover, include identifying the three states of matter, distinguishing between extensive and intensive properties of matter, classifying physical changes, and identifying the difference between physical and chemical changes. So let's go ahead and get started. If you have seen or heard of geysers before, they're very powerful bursts of steam and water, and it's an interesting process, and it's an interesting phenomenon that's happening all around the world. Leaves changing color every year is also something pretty cool and interesting, as well as glaciers forming into different shapes. All these things are changes that matter undergoes. Remember, matter is anything that has mass and occupies space. So matter is changing in these situations, and we're going to talk about, are they physical changes or are they chemical changes? But first we got to talk about their properties. So properties of matter. What kinds of properties does matter have? They have physical properties. So a physical property is a quality or condition of a substance that can be observed or measured without changing the substance composition. That's the key idea here. Without changing the substance composition. So it's still the same thing. We're not changing the identity, and we're not making something new with a physical property. Example of what a physical property would not be would be your minion. A minion that went from yellow to purple is not a physical property because it's changing its composition. There are two types of physical properties. The first one is extensive properties, and these are types of properties that depend on the amount of matter. Examples of that would include mass and volume. So each of these different types of balls, so golf ball, tennis ball, and baseball, all have different amounts of matter. So they have different mass and different volumes and sizes, so those are all extensive properties. Intensive properties are the second type, and these are types of properties that depend on the matter but not the amount of sample that you have. So whether you have a small amount or you have a big amount, your intensive properties of matters will still be the same. The best example of that would be density. The density of a substance will be the same, and it does not depend upon how much of you have of that type of matter. Another thing is absorbency. Whether you have a small amount or a big amount, if something can absorb water, it will absorb water, just like a paper towel. And whether or not something is conductive of electricity, these are all intensive properties of matter. Chemical properties, so on the other side there are chemical properties. Chemical properties are ability for a substance to undergo a specific chemical change. An example of that would be ability for something to rust. So a lot of metals rust over time. That is a chemical property, ability for something to rust. We do not have that chemical properties. Humans can't rust. So that is the difference between us and metals. There's actually a book about rust and the history of rust and how it happens. But rust is a big part of what happens to a lot of metals. That's my alma mater from University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, and it used to look something like this, the brown. And because of rust, it turned into this lime green color. So something that has the ability to rust is a chemical property. What kinds of changes does matter undergo? So there are, again, two types of changes, and we're going to have, if you want to make a column in your notes, dividing the page in half, so you can do chemical changes on one and physical changes on the other. There are slides that, continuing on, have more information about chemical and physical changes separated out. So a brief overview first, though, is that physical changes are changes during which some properties change but the composition does not. So the composition of the matter still stays the same, but the properties change. So going from a solid to a liquid, when something melts, like if we're in my hot classroom, we might feel like we're melting a little bit. That would be a physical change because it's still the same substance or still the same matter, just a different composite or different state of matter. A chemical change are changes during which the composition always changes. Anything that burns, burning is a chemical change because it's changing the composition of what it's burning. So something like Moltres from Team Valor would be a chemical change, something that's burning. Continuing with physical changes, so let's go more in depth with that. Physical changes usually happen between the three states of matter, which are solid, liquid, and gas. On the other hand, chemical changes, there are 4 ways to determine whether something is a chemical change, because you can't always see it that easily. And those 4 ways are formation of a precipitate or a solid, formation of a gas, color change, and a temperature change. So those are 4 ways to determine if there's a chemical change happening. Okay? Formation of a gas and formation of a precipitate are your best indicators. So I would put a star by them. These are usually the best indicators that a chemical change has occurred. All chemical changes obey the law of conservation of mass. And the conservation of mass law states mass is neither created or destroyed in a chemical reaction. So if you had 5 grams of something like a solid and you went through a chemical reaction and it changed substance, you would still have 5 grams of it at the end of that reaction because of the law of conservation of mass. Okay, so that also goes with physical changes. So if you had 5 grams of a liquid and it turns into a gas, you're still going to have 5 grams of that gas because of the law of conservation of mass. Mass is neither created or destroyed. So in this, we talked about the 3 states of matter, solid, liquid, gas. We distinguish between extensive and intensive properties. Extensive properties depend on the amount that you have. Intensive properties do not depend on the amount of matter you have. Physical changes are changes that change the sort of shape or structure, but not the composition of the matter. And then the difference between a physical and a chemical change is that chemical changes do change or always change the composition of the type of matter you have. We're going to go through the other ones in other videos throughout the week, but other than that, have a great night. If you have any questions, let me know tomorrow.